All right, so let's move on to talk a little bit about relative elasticities and a few different types of elasticity that you'll come in contact with in the class. So what we've just been talking about is different elasticities along different points on a demand curve. But we can actually compare the relative elasticities of different demand curves by looking at their slopes. So a perfectly elastic demand curve is one where consumers purchase any number of goods at a certain price, but raise the price at all and consumption would go to zero. A perfectly inelastic demand curve would be a demand curve where people would buy a fixed quantity of the product no matter what the price was. Any change in price would have no effect on the change in quantity. So you can see based on these extremes that the steeper the demand curve, the less elastic. The flatter the demand curve, the more elastic. So now looking at this picture, which demand curve is more elastic, D1 or D2? It's D1, right? D1 is flatter and therefore more elastic than D2. And you can see what we mean by this if we think about a simple price change and the effect on both sets of consumers. So if I have, say, a decrease in price goes down, people are going to buy more. How much more? It depends. So for D2, you can see the change in consumption is a bit small. For D1, the change in consumption is much larger. So in response to the same change in price, consumers on D1 purchased a lot more. They changed their behavior more, and that's why we say that D1 is more elastic than D2. Let's just talk about a couple more types of elasticity. Price elasticity of supply is really similar in its calculation and interpretation of the price elasticity of demand. There's no relationship between supply and total revenue, so you can forget that part when we're talking about price elasticity of supply, but everything else is really analogous. We would calculate the price elasticity of supply by taking the derivative of demand with respect to price, multiplying that by price times price over quantity. And we would interpret that number in the same way as we interpret the price elasticity of demand. Is it bigger than 1, smaller than 1, equal to 1? And how does the price elasticity of supply compare across different supply curves? All very similar to what we're doing for demand, so I'm not going to go over that in detail here. Income elasticity of demand is going to measure the responsiveness of consumption, right? We're talking about demand, so consumption to changes in income. Right, so now instead of price changes, we're talking about income changes, but same idea. How responsive are consumers to some change? In this case, income. So we're going to take the percent change in quantity over the percent change in income and then think about what that means. The interpretation here is going to be different from our price elasticity because here we're interested in whether or not we have a normal or inferior good. You'll remember normal goods, you consume more when your income goes up, meaning that both the numerator and the denominator will have the same sign. Income goes up, consumption goes up, and vice versa. So for normal goods, your income elasticity will be positive. But for inferior goods, your income elasticity will be negative. In other words, an increase in income would lead to a decrease in consumption, making that fraction a negative number. We can further categorize normal goods into necessities and luxuries. So these will all have positive income elasticities, but necessities will have an income elasticity between 0 and 1, meaning that when your income goes up, maybe you buy more, but not a lot more, and you only need so much toilet paper, right? For luxuries, as your income increases, you might start consuming something or your consumption might increase quite a bit relative to when you had a lower income. And so for luxuries, our income elasticity would be even greater than 1. The final type of elasticity that I want to talk to you about is cross-price elasticity. Cross-price elasticity measures the relationship between two different products. So here we want to know, how does consumption of one good change when the price of another good changes? So we want to know, based on this fraction, whether goods are substitutes or complements, and that's going to be determined by whether or not the cross-price elasticity is bigger or smaller than 0. So if the cross-price elasticity is positive, that means that the goods are substitutes. For example, the price of Coke increases. People are definitely going to buy less Coke, and they might buy more of Pepsi, its substitute. So you can see that our price change and our quantity change are moving in the same direction, meaning they're either both positive or both negative, so the overall fraction will be greater than 0. And the vice versa for complements, you'll have a cross-price elasticity that's negative because as the price of, say, peanut butter increases, you're definitely going to consume less peanut butter, and that means that you might also consume less jelly. Here you see the price change and the quantity change are in opposite directions. So when price goes up, quantity goes down, meaning that fraction is going to be a negative number. All right, that sums it up for our review.